For over 40 years, the Sundance Film Festival has been held on the traditional and ancestral homelands of the Shoshone, Paiute, Gojute, and Ute tribal nations. We do land acknowledgements to recognize the traditional stewards of this land and our 500 years of resistance to ongoing colonialism. But can we acknowledge the land without listening to the land? Take a moment to really listen. From the Ute to the Wet'suwet'en, from the Anishinaabe to the Kingdom of Hawaii, indigenous nations all over the world understand that the land does not belong to us. We belong to the land. And we continue to fight for her. Let this land acknowledgement move you beyond symbolic recognition. Let it be your call to action. Support indigenous resistance. Join us in the fight to protect our mother, for our human and non-human kin, for the next 7 generations.
Hello, and welcome to the 2022 Sundance Film Festival. My name is Ash Hoyle. I'm one of the programmers on our Beyond Film programming team. Thank you so much for joining us today for Power of Story, Artists Unbound, presented by Netflix. We're joined today by an electrifying panel of multi-hyphenate, boundary-pushing artists. They're joining us from all around the world to bring you this special edition of Power of Story. Roberta Calindres is an actor and writer, known for her work in Fun Home on Broadway, I Love Dick, and Beta. Roberta has also been working on the upcoming reboot of A League of Their Own. Zachary Drucker is an independent artist, filmmaker, and producer, known for producing both This Is Me and Transparent. Most recently, Zachary's directorial debut, The Lady in the Dale, premiered on HBO in 2021. This year, we're proud to have Zachary featured in a festival film as well, Framing Agnes. Jeremy O. Harris is the playwright and creator of Slave Play, which is hailed as the most Tony-nominated Broadway play ever. Jeremy is a co-writer of Janixa Bravo's feature film Zola, which premiered at the 2020 Sundance Film Festival. Jeremy is also an actor, most recently featured in the Gossip Girl reimagining and season 2 of Emily in Paris. And finally, our moderator, Alex Jung, is a feature writer at New York Magazine and a senior writer at Vulture. Alex is a preeminent journalist on film, television, and culture, writing about everything from edits that define the modern internet video to queer cinema. We are so excited to share this conversation with all of you at home. Without further ado, I have to welcome to the digital stage our moderator, Alex Jung.
Thank you, Ash. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Zoom yet again. I'm Alex Jung, a features writer at New York Magazine, and I am thrilled to be moderating The Power of Story, Artists Unbound. And today I'm joined by Roberta Colindres, Zachary Drucker, and Jeremy O'Harris. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks, Alex. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm okay.
I am very sad that we can't be doing this, in person at Sundance, but we are all in our respective abodes right now, at least safe. So hopefully that's a blessing.
Absolutely.
So I thought that, one way we could just begin is talking a little bit about maybe some projects that you're working on at the moment. I sort of thought it would be interesting to think about the question in terms of what are your current preoccupations. Zachary, I know you have a work that you're promoting here at the festival this year, but I assume you also probably have other projects that you have in your head. And so I'd just love to hear about them.
Absolutely. I guess I'll jump off. Agnes, framing Agnes. I'm sorry, let me start over. Thank you so much, Alex. It's such a pleasure to be here, to be this head and shoulders on Zoom with all of you, conflating space-time and connecting through the air. And it's wonderful to see you, Jeremy. One of our last moments in public was at Sundance 2020. Zola was everything. And just thrilled to be a part of Sundance 2022. Framing Agnes is a film that I'm in, directed by Chase Joynt. It's premiering on Saturday, and it resurrects the forgotten legacies of trans predecessors who went through the UCLA Gender Clinic in the early 1960s. They were some of the first folks to receive, gender-related care and had to find, inventive and ways to receive healthcare. Their stories were recorded at the time, in transcript form and found decades later. And a cast of trans luminaries in the present inhabit their voices, exorcise their stories, and revisit the narratives that represent our origin point. I think it's very helpful to know who your ghosts are, and that there is an element of channeling, of being a medium that's so crucial to trans and gender expansive identities through time. And getting to know these 6 stories has really impacted my perception of where we're at today, how much has changed and how little has changed. And I'm working on 2 films right now. I have been for the past year, and they are really challenging. I'm deeply invested in telling stories of outsiders and badasses and renegades, and that will be at the forefront of these next 2 projects, which are slated to be released this year and next year.
That's
Do you want me to keep going, or is that
no. Yeah,
I
I mean, I have many follow-up questions, particularly regarding Framing Agnes, but I think we can sort of go back to it also. If Jeremy would like to talk about what he's thinking about and working on right now.
No, I mean, first of all, I'm always so excited to be able to chat with both of you. I mean, Alex, I love you, as you know, and Zachary, I've loved you and known you for so many years now. And I love that you mentioned that Framing Agnes is about those early UCLA gender, the gender clinics that were happening at UCLA, because I just did a lot of research on that. Speaking of current preoccupations, while working on my first TV writing thing, where I was show running Vanishing Half. And so that book in its second part takes place in and around UCLA in the early 1960s, or early 1970s, late 1960s. And there is a transmasculine character there. So my writer's room and I were really digging into a lot of those histories and picking a lot of those up. And so a lot of those have been living with me as we've moved past that room, and I've started to work on other things and thinking about how queer people document themselves or keep keep a history of themselves has been really important to me, because so much of the work that I've been asked to do, that I see my queer peers being asked to do, it's been coming at such a breakneck speed that I don't feel like a lot of us are taking time to really document and make sense of what this moment means for us, or what it's meant for, not for us collectively, but also us individually. So I've been really preoccupied with taking a real journaling practice recently. I've also taken a camera around with me a little bit more. And I've been exploring what it might look like for me to not just allow people like Alex to write about what I've been doing and how I've been experiencing my time, but for me to also maybe put a mark on that myself, in whatever way that might end up taking form. And then I've just been trying to fall back in love with writing, because I feel like, in the last 2 years, I think, there was so much excitement around Zola at Sundance when I was here last time, and so much potentiality for what my maturation of my career was going to be. And I think that even though no opportunities left, the sense of being stalled for 2 years, 2.5 years, 3 years now, has made my artistic process very different than it was in January 2020 than what it is in January 2022. And so I'm trying to get closer to where I was in January 2020, where I felt like possibilities were endless with my pen. And now there feel like there are a lot of finite possibilities of what I can do or how I can do it and who will be able to do it because of COVID. And I'm trying to throw out of my head and just get back to freedom.
I guess the pandemic was really kind of a shocking hit in this way that I don't want to say I'm grateful for the pandemic or anything, but it has given, I think, a lot of people, but for me, it's given me this opportunity to kind of go from a place of more the observer than I have been coming from in a long time. So busy, trying to get work and act and stuff, and pursue acting work that I think I just kind of put observation on the kind of back burner for a while. And so I guess my preoccupation these days is just kind of something that Jeremy was talking about a lot, and obviously Zachary, just documenting, and just making sure that I remember as I'm going that it's impossible almost to be present sometimes in every single moment of our lives. So it's cool to have, I have my camcorder right here. I have my camcorder on me all the time. I have a couple cameras on me all the time, and just, kind of filming everything as I go, because life happens pretty fast. And it is true, what Alex had kind of referenced with his question about the difference between being asked about yourself and showing what your perspective on stuff has been. And so, yeah, just trying to, be present and hold and receive information all at the same time. That's kind of been my preoccupation.
This question of the archive is really interesting to me because, Agnes and many of the other people in the UCLA archives sort of emerged through transcript within the confines of this kind of clinician clinical space, right? And I was just curious, like, what your relationship to the archive was in that sense, Zachary. You know, you're playing Agnes. You are a medium in some ways, channeling this person who is still confined by the rubric of this, you know, cis het white man, I assume, maybe not, right? And his idea of gender. And so I assume that there's a kind of a looking askew at the thing. And yeah, so I was just curious what your relationship to Agnes was and the archive in that sense.
Mm.
Did that make sense?
You know, I think that hearing her voice was so helpful in terms of just like reaching through time and touching her subjecthood. And it's so difficult to comprehend the circumstances in which those people were operating and trying to actualize themselves. I have a tremendous amount of empathy while also navigating the distance between generations. And I'm struck by the consistent, you know, resilience and perseverance of gender expansive people through time. Agnes is not necessarily exceptional in that sense, so much as she's a 1960s trans white every woman. And you know, I do kind of include her in my list of spirit guides to some extent. Although the other narratives that came to the forefront were even more inspiring in many ways. I'm always thankful that the representations exist, even how flawed and troubling and problematic they are. The camera has always been used as a tool of colonization, a tool of power that's embedded in the history of filmmaking and of photography, and it's inescapable. And yet we learn so much about that power, about how power operates, and about how people navigate around it to be who they are. So the archive is very helpful in locating ourselves in a history that's largely an oral history, largely a history that we have to seek out and find. One of the things I love about living in the future is that these characters from the past continue to emerge thanks to, you know, the work of scholars and academics and the many storytellers and people who are working to keep these in our consciousness.
Right, and the idea that the past is maybe not so different from the present either. That these people have always existed. They just may have, you know, invisibility may have been a friend at the time. Also, you know.
Absolutely. I mean, the future is better and worse simultaneously because progress grows alongside opposition, and it's. I mean, we're in this moment of. I think white supremacy in particular is more prescient, more pervasive, more, you know, it's grown as there's been a movement of anti-racism for 100 years. And it's better and worse at the same time. It doesn't go in one direction. And I think the, you know, to the purpose of the panel, that artists have an expanded role in the future, that there is no longer these rarefied spaces of storytelling, of art, and that we are uniquely qualified to see around the corner, to see through obstacles, and to obliterate the boxes that exist as we all take on more expansive identities.
You know, all of you have worked in, you know, more avant-garde or experimental forms. You know, I'm thinking visual art, photography, performance, neo-futurist theater, and I'm interested in sort of keeping this question slightly open-ended, but these forays into more maybe rigidly structured spaces like TV and film. I'm curious what your experience has been, kind of moving from maybe a more experimental avant-garde space into one that has a lot of stakes, maybe is the best way to put it, or many stakeholders who have opinions about what you should do.
Yeah, I do come from the theater, which is such a place of freedom. And it's funny because I always thought, theater, it's you don't get to change the dialogue, you don't get to change the blocking just out of nowhere, in traditional forms of theater. And then film is really the place, and TV is really the place where you can try new things every take. But it is kind of interesting that it is a more rigid place of like, I think just commercial anything has become this more rigid place where we have to be really careful about, as we're seeing like more and more different kinds of stories are being told, we also have to be really aware of who wants to tell them, who wants to finance them, who we're giving the privilege of the storytelling to, and in that way, I think Zachary was really really said something beautiful about just how the future is better and worse simultaneously, and we because of how risk informs oppression, and how daring to tell new kinds of stories is more and more, we're not just focused anymore on kind of undoing the damage of hundreds of years of storytelling through theater and now film and TV, but like now we're trying to tell new stories, and so we're being met with like a new kind of oppression, and and I think it's really exciting. I think it's really a beautiful and scary time, and I think that there's a lot of sensitivity because of it. And yeah, I don't know. I think I want to think that I actually kind of, when I was younger, I always wanted to wear a uniform in school, because I was like, if I had to wear the same thing every day, how could I be creative enough to like explore a new look with the same thing that everyone else is wearing? And in those ways, there's something exciting about like the rigidity of what we're experiencing today with trying to tell new stories, because there has to be a way to break through that, and that's going to be really exciting. And I don't know. I hope that some of the rigidity kind of goes away over time, and hopefully it is. But there's so much containment still around what we're trying to do, and how we're trying to further the dialogue between different communities and large audiences. So,
I mean, I think that for me, I mean, I have put, I'm thinking of like, I love what Zachary just said about the archive and what it can mean for storytelling, and what it can mean for like us in the future. I love thinking of myself as someone who's in the future, because I think I constantly think of myself as in the present, but it's kind of psychedelic to think like, yes, I'm in the future. Like no matter where I am, no matter what I'm doing, I'm in the future, no matter how many futurities there are in front of me, like whatever. Anyway, it's cool. But like I decided
and you
to
could
like,
say that there's only the future, there is no present or past, right?
yes, it's true. I think that's one of the things that for me has been very important as I sort of built my space, and I'm in the space that I've like cultivated for myself, has been in cultivating a world wherein I can have these totems to like the voices of the avant-garde in the past that like remind me that like there's nothing I can do right now that's too that will be too destabilizing for the system I'm a part of, right? And I think that like the more I have like, you know, a totem to Adrian Kennedy right here, or a totem to Alice Childress over there, or a record of the band called Death right there, like or you know, my Mishima print right here. The easier it is for my brain to remember that like the art of storytelling is constantly the art of like breaking something apart and putting it back together in ways that have already in ways that stories have already been broken apart and put them back together. But each time we break them and put them back together, there's some slight difference that makes them really exciting and uniquely you. And so I think that's something I only know because I was in the theater, right? Because like you can't go to make a play and of romance and not immediately think of Romeo and Juliet and how you're working in or around that same tradition, or how you're breaking it in order to make something new while making it look exactly the same. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. You sort of break and then put back together in a lot of senses.
Constantly.
Yeah.
Constantly. And I think we did that with Zola, and you know, I think that was one of the reasons why, you know, our little movie that could has like lasted in sort of people's psyches since, you know, January 2020 and all the way to like January 2022, with people like nominating us for Indie Spirit Awards and all these other things, is that like we didn't like say like, this is Twitter, this is so weird and there's no way to make sense of it. We're like, great, like we come from avant-garde traditions. We've read Heiner Mueller, we've read, you know, like even Toni Morrison, and we can see how like these writers are working in similar traditions to like a 19-year-old like woman tweeting from Detroit, right? And if we look at it like that through like the lens of these avant-garde things and put them in the lens of film, how can we make something that feels similar to things people have already seen before while also feeling brand new? And that's where Janixa, I think, came up with her great line of it being like Blue Velvet mixed with Cardi B, right? Or Blue Velvet as sung by Cardi B or something like that, which I find to be like really exciting.
Absolutely. And, you know, I'll add as a visual artist, as a person who went through art school and the kind of like deep conceptual jargon of CalArts. And I found that, you know, in this landscape that we're in, and being a trans person, I feel an ethical obligation to amplify our stories to the largest possible audiences. And I felt siloed in the art world very early on. And it gave me an opportunity to really express my own stuff in my 20s. But as I kind of moved into opportunities that were simply not there before 2014, I have felt called to be in service of our community. And I think that all of the boundaries and barriers between typical genres or ways of working practices are breaking down and less prohibitive. I never wanted to repeat myself ever. And as a young person, I even committed to my adult self that I wouldn't be bored as an adult. So I'm keeping that commitment alive. And there's always, you know, the idea will dictate to you the form. And I think also in certain cases that there are, you know, the stories emerging and coming into existence, that sometimes we are messengers for them, and that they are moving through us. And I know that's a very California position to express, but truly, you know, I felt that so strongly with The Lady in the Dale and Liz Carmichael, that I was wrestling with the spirit of Liz, and that she was in many ways moving through me, and I was touching her through time.
Have there been boundaries that you
Yeah, I'm going to speak as an actor on this because that's mostly what my work has been, or what most people have seen my work as an actor. As an actor, I feel, and I can only speak for myself, but I kind of think this is a general truth. From having spoken with different kinds of actors, queer actors, straight actors, white actors, people of color, and it just, for me, it just sometimes the boundaries that I feel like I'm facing or the actors are facing right now are the ones that most appear like doors opening. And what I mean by that is that, like, you know, we're in this place of emphasizing the need for diversity and for diversity, you know, casting diversely and telling different kinds of stories. But one of the things that I find really, really frustrating and a huge boundary between actually like where we are and actually getting to a place where we're telling the most honest, truthful, you know, just real versions of our world and of our lives is when it comes to writing characters and when it comes to imagining characters. And so what, you know, however the process goes of creating a project and creating characters and creating a world for that project, by the time that the actor receives the breakdown for the character, there's a huge problem that exists there. And that is that, and again, I because I go in for a lot of queer Latin characters. But again, from having conversations with other people, I know that when someone gets a character breakdown, it usually starts with, you know, it'll be like Melinda, Latinx, butch, tough as nails, doesn't take shit from anybody, says what she means what she says. And it's like, okay, you just said the same thing 3 times just to get the same point across, which is that this character is tough. And the reason that you wrote a tough character to be the way she is because you also imagine that she's tough because she's Latin, which means in this kind of the way that we write characters, you imagine that if she's Latin, she's probably from a poorer neighborhood. And if she's butch, it's probably because that was the strong way to be in this like harder place. And so it's just, I guess the boundary is the rigidity of people's imaginations. People we're still so far behind actually seeing what's in front of us. And it's kind of, it's really frustrating. Like I would give anything to get a character breakdown that was, to even just get a project and to see the characters broken down and to have a character named, Elizabeth, who is, has always felt very out of place, who was very different from all her friends. All her friends had eating disorders and they all dated the same 3 guys and they all stayed in the town that she grew up in. And she went to study law in New York City and accidentally came upon a documentary about, the Loch Ness Monster, and has since given up her position at her law firm to go on an uncharted mission to go find the Loch Ness Monster, and then to read the script and then, or to talk with the director about the project and be like, oh, that character Elizabeth, when we meet her, she's actually having a huge fight with everyone in her life, or, her parents who are like, ¿Qué estás haciendo? And her girlfriend who's like, we haven't taken a vacation together in 4 years and all of a sudden you're throwing everything away for this weird, that would be incredible, because then that would mean that this director, this writer had imagined this completely nuanced person whose life in actuality didn't have that much to do with the fact that they were gay or a person of color. It was just like the other interesting stuff in their life, which was all this information that is usually a privilege of cis white characters that other characters don't really get. And so for me, that's kind of the boundary, the kind of the limited kind of ideas that we have about yeah, stereotyping, and we're still there, unfortunately. But and I think that we're working on it. The more the people are allowed to tell different stories, but you know, I think that, yeah, even in that way, we're kind of still like living in like the you know, the financing hellhole of like, well, nobody's gonna go watch that movie, you know. And it's like, of course, we're like living inside the Spider-Man meme, where everyone's kind of pointing at each other whose fault it is that you know, certain kinds of movies aren't being made, or certain kind of characters aren't, you know. And so I find all that stuff kind of a huge boundary. And even like the idea of like, you know, seeking diverse casting is just a kind of, I still kind of see it as this like lazy band-aid, you know, because it's like a lot of times it's like interested in inclusive, or you know, inclusive racial casting, and it's like the 5 leads are all white and everyone around them is a person of color or gay or whatever. And you know, it's like that the work isn't being done that way. We're seeing people, but they don't have nuance, they don't have like substance yet. And so yeah, that's just, yeah, I think there's quite a few boundaries.
You found difficult to sort of surmount or overcome in your work?
I feel like anytime I feel a boundary in my work, I sort of barrel through it. And I think like recently my biggest boundary has been myself, right? Like this self that's constantly feeling beholden to like a bunch of people whose names I don't know and faces I've never seen, right? And I think that like, you know, when I was writing in complete anonymity, it was really fun because I had the only blocks I had were like were again just like blocks that were around like financial blocks or blocks around time that like were like, you know, how will I have time to write a, you know, 120-page play? I have to like work at a donut shop, which is what I did. I literally worked at a donut shop in Highland Park while, you know, being a personal shopper for like wealthy ladies. And then once I was free of that barrier, I could just write. And then once that writing built an audience for me, and an audience invited like a lot of critics of me, that's when I started to see blocks that I had to figure out how to move through, right? Like I was never someone who felt like there was a certain way one couldn't write a certain person, because like I've met so many people who are so weird and so crazy. Like I've met like Black gay villains and who have been like, you are literally an evil person. Like I see very little about you that is like worth like saying is good. And now like if I were to write that character, I would, right as I was writing them, in doing all the actions they were doing, I would think about the 15,000 Twitter comments I'd get that would be like, oh, here we go. Jeremy O'Harris once again hates Black gay men. They would ignore the fact that like I've had multiple Black gay men who have been like amazing, but it'll be a thing. And so I think about that person, even though they might not ever say that, but that becomes a thing. And so I think that I've been working with my therapist and also working with myself on like moving through critiques that haven't been written yet. So I can get back to that sort of honest, free person that didn't feel beholden to like being a face of a nation, right? Because I think Zachary, you and I both, in like, you know, as in the world that we worlds that we occupy, are beholden to a lot of people. I think that like trans people feel very, very, very underrepresented because they are, and there's a lot of like there's a lot of anxiety around how like they will be portrayed in society. Black people feel very, very similarly because of, again, like I think that there's a lot of watching Disclosure was like an amazing moment for me because there were so many equal parallels in how disgustingly we've been portrayed in the media, and like the media's sort of like 150 year slate of making films. I just added a bunch of years to how long we've been making films. Anyway, you get what I'm saying. So I think that like there are a lot of people who feel anxiety about how we'll portray the identities that we are. And I think that like that anxiety is something I didn't have myself before, and now I do.
Thank you for that, Jeremy. It's so true. It's so wonderful to hear your perspective on that. And I do think that a major boundary is the noise itself. Just the fact that it's such a bombastic, trans-apocalyptic world that we're navigating, and it's so loud simply to participate in public discourse because it's completely unhinged a lot of the time, and we are ultimately reachable, accountable, and existing in public. And it's not conducive to creativity. It's not conducive to sitting down and writing a screenplay or a script. It's not conducive to editing a film. Or, like you can only participate in public discourse insofar as your work is not being hampered. So I think that's the one thing that comes to mind, and certainly the trauma of communities who have been maligned and done dirty in representation is very difficult to contend with when you are a living, breathing person who also has trauma and is also trying to heal that through creation. And then two, I think the system itself is impossible oftentimes, in the sense that it's a system that's interested in reformation and changing and bringing more diverse creators into the fold, but it's still with these executives who have no or have underdeveloped consciousness. They want to keep the same writers and directors employed, and so there's this. It's like folks have not been willing to give anything up to share with us. It's more like, we'll bring you into the fold, but you're like an additional person. And then I see that there's tremendous interest in developing stories, and oftentimes they're not getting made, it seems. And that's been a few years of friends getting pilots sold with major companies, and when it comes time, the studios decline to create them. And so being
What do you think that is? Sorry to interrupt. I'm just, I'm curious to hear you psychoanalyze the underdeveloped consciousness.
I think it's a fear of a modernizing world, and people are sometimes pandering to that fear and sometimes flowing into the future and recognizing that this is a modernizing world. But, modernization is a cause for cultural conflict. It always has been. And we're upon, potential like fascist takeover in America. And so, yeah, I think that that will impact what gets made, how much gets made, if things get made. And I've definitely wondered if there's a kind of dialing back of, that progress has been too scary for the status quo, for people in power. And it'll be really interesting, I think, in these next few years. I mean, modernization wins always. Like, time only moves in one direction, and if you are indignant, it's futile. Time wins, and we are on the right side of history in creating a more expansive future where there's more opportunity and more equality. Power has been hoarded and used against women, people of color, queer people, trans people, people with disabilities. And if this has been a real reckoning. I think the industry is clunky in navigating that.
You know, Zachary, I like you talking about sort of the sort of limited psychologies of like people in power and like how that sort of limits the stories that are being told or being not the stories that are being told, because stories will be told no matter what, right? But the stories that like are being financed to be told on like larger stages, right? Has me thinking about something that I wasn't sure what I was going to talk about today, but I wonder if how you and Roberta have witnessed this. But like something that's been very curious to me in this moment wherein like last year, every white person in power was like, oh my God, I discovered racism again. Like, oh my God, I had no idea this happened. Like the racial reckoning. Like if I had to hear racial reckoning one more time, I was going to explode. Because I was just like, I thought we had this conversation like last year when like another Black person died, or the year before that when another Black person died. Like I don't know what it was about this one, and I do have theories that it was like the bird watching woman more so than it was George Floyd, but that's an entirely different conversation. Because I do think there was something about people being like, well, she worked for like Hillary Clinton, and like she seems like me, that like made them really freak out. And that happened 3 days before George Floyd. Anyway, I could go down a rabbit hole about that. But the thing I'm really curious about is that like it literally took less than like 9 months for that, after that, for me to be on the phone with a major executive of a major company, talking to them about like a show that another friend was writing that I was going to maybe produce. That was like, I think one of the most exciting queer things I've seen written about a non-white queer person that would be like a big ensemble television show. And the thing I was met with was, we already have a show by a person of color in development. And I was like, wait, what? And they were like, yeah, like we do. So like, I just don't know that we need this one. Also, like we have like these 2 white gay shows. So like, we kind of got gay covered. And I was just sort of like, oh, wow. Like it's like, you still see us all as such like little boxes to be ticked in, such like a fraction of like existence, that you can have 7 shows on the air that look exactly like Succession with no anxiety whatsoever. But the minute someone like says like, what if there was a show about gay people or queer people where like on one show they were lesbians, and on another show they were trans, and on another show they were gay, and what if there were like 2 versions of those where like some people were Asians and some people were Black and some people were Latino? There's like, how would that even make sense? There's no room for us. There's no more white men. We need more Silicon Valleys. We need more give me another like Better Off Ted. It's like, and I think that there's something as well that's just like around like capital and how people see capital, and like the fact that like there are no queer people on a dollar bill and no Black people on a dollar bill or no Asian people on a dollar bill, that makes it very impossible for them to see us like making them, like as much as we buy, as much as we spend. I think there is this anxiety that like only white men will like be able to bring money home. And that's why you see so many of them on TV, on a very like plain spoken level, for like how simple the psychology is for the people in charge.
I mean, he's absolutely right. That is a thing that has happened. And it actually kind of brings up the question for me, which is like, I am genuinely curious about like, what is the ideology behind that? Because then you have like 6 shows that are exactly the same. And yet they're like, but we already have the thing that's like yours and we don't have room for them. It's like, but you what? Like, and it is confounding actually. And it comes back to like the thing about risks. I think studio executives in their pursuit of making money and being and what is in their terms successful is making this highly acclaimed, very watched final product, and everyone gets that. But I just don't understand with casting, especially like. I come across this stuff a lot when they're like, we're looking for like a star, like someone who's already a star, and it's just like, but how do you think people become stars? Like how do you, if you don't give them a chance to start out, or like if you don't give them that, like if who else could have played Timothy Chalamet's part in Call Me by Your Name. You know, like it had to be him. It had to be him that broke out. Sorry, the doorbell rang. It had to be him that broke out, and you know, and so I think that even extends into just like storytelling. Like how is it possible that we feel that we can only tell so many, you know, like even the fact that like Jeremy is being told like, oh, we can't make that show because we already have like a queer Black project and we don't have the room is essentially saying without saying it, like you think that every Black queer experience is a monolith. And so that there is no thing that you could say that is different, that Jeremy could say that is different from what the other person who's made their show is gonna say. And that just feeds this idea that we're like, that we amount to just a bunch of stereotypes that we can't break free from, that we are essentially all just like living the same kind of experience all the time. And I think it's really damaging. And it, sorry about that. I think it just, I think it sucks, and I think it's really silly, and it's really damaging. I do like, sorry to keep going. Like I just, you know, I can only, you know, like I was part of, I was in a play called Fun Home, a musical called Fun Home. That actually started at Sundance and as a workshop, and then it made its way, holy shit, the doorbell. Never in my life has anyone rang the doorbell this many times. Right, so I was in this show called Fun Home that was, it is a play, a musical based on a comic book, which is already like the readership for comic books. I don't know what it is, but I can't imagine it's, you know, huge, or I don't know, maybe I'm wrong about it. But it's a musical about with a lesbian protagonist talking about suicide, and producers were willing to risk a lot of money to bring this thing to Broadway eventually, and you know, have people say like, well, why would I watch that? That's about a lesbian with a gay dad who kills himself. Like I have no relation to that topic whatsoever. Like, you know, and instead they took this risk and they paid for it, and then we won a Tony. You know, so I think that it's all, I think people like mitigate risk in this way that's actually manifested in this kind of like narrow understanding of like how culture actually moves along. We have to be able to have conversations. We have to be able to have various conversations about the same thing, even to like get somewhere, anywhere. And so I hear that all the time from people that take out shows, you know, especially people of color, queer people that are like, well, we already have that, you know, and it's like, well, so what, you know? Which is silly, because then all of a sudden you have, you know, 3 shows come out at the same time about the same serial killer, and it's like, what the fuck, you know? So yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on that, Zachary?
I mean, you know, I'll just say that I don't.
You know, I mean, Jeremy, I also have you know, like I do feel also a certain kind of anxiety around tying success to capital, right? You know, maybe it's the feeling that like the only movie that people are willing to bet on is Spider-Man, you know, or a Marvel film. And, you know, in some ways you're like, yeah, the Marvel film does do really well, right? So if you're just kind of only thinking, or if a studio is thinking in the framework of, you know, what will make me money, then I'm like, all right, I guess another superhero, you know? So I know I feel like a certain kind of anxiety around like, you know, this needs to make X amount of money or get X amount of clicks or what have you in order to be validated. Yeah, that's just a fear that I have.
No, I mean, I am the everyone. So I'm gonna get really real. Let's get really real. I was literally we were going to make a film version of Slave Play. Janixa was going to record it and make like a sort of, because I don't Slave Play is a play. It's a play. It's not like it's not a movie. It's not a TV show. People have asked for it to be both, and I was like, no, it's a play. If I ever made it, I would just shoot it like a really great play, like in a way that like no one shoots plays anymore. It would be more like a DV8 film, or like what Jonathan Demme did with Stop Making Sense, but it would be a great like concert film. It's like, so, but in order to do that, you had to have a great filmmaker. So Janixa was going to direct a film version of Slave Play on Broadway for the second run. But part of the reason it's not happening now is because of Omicron, because a lot of people just didn't assume that we were still in a global pandemic, even though we were. So when numbers started to rise again, there was anxiety and some financing pulled. Anyway, one of the things that was said as people were scrambling to make sure we could still do it on the phone about my play that was nominated for the most Tony Awards of all time was that we have to prove to everyone that Slave Play was a success. Like, people look at the numbers of Slave Play and they're like, that wasn't a success, it was a failure. And if we do this movie and we sell it right, it'll show everyone that it was a success. And I was like, hold up, hold the phone. I'm sorry. My play was the most talked about play since Angels in America. And that is no cap, that is no like self-aggrandizement. That's just like a fact. It's just like, you wrote about it, Alex, you helped that, like, you know, like I was just like, do we live in such a backward society that like people who like invest in these things invest in a thing that like, so like independent film and Broadway theater are the worst things to invest in if you ever want to make money. So like it's just like a truly psychotic endeavor to be like, I need my investors to make money back, because like if you're doing that for that, then you've done it for the wrong reasons. And like the success of this thing was that like it brought conversations out that like I had never seen brought out before. It like, you know, got people to the theater that I've never seen in the theater before. And yet none of those things mattered as much as like whether or not we had made, you know, $10 million or something doing a play called Slave Play, as though we were like endeavoring to make Wicked. And so part of my MO as a producer, having done this amazing deal with HBO and a couple other people that will be announced later, is that like I've been able to get money that like no one is expecting back, right? So when I produced Fake Friends' Circle Jerk, which was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize, we gave people tickets for $5. They got to see it online anywhere in the world they were, and no one expected them to make their money back on a play they shot and filmed better than I think even some episodes of SNL have been shot and filmed. Because like I knew that I wanted to make a play that actually would make people have questions about like what white supremacy looked like for gay people, and that's not going to make a lot of money. And I think that like I hope that now that we're in this moment of hyper capital, wherein there are companies that are worth billions of dollars, like literally Reese Witherspoon's podcasting like book club company is worth $1 billion. Like, how can we use some of those billions to start creating spaces where like movies and stories can be financed where we aren't expecting capital at the other side of it? We're just expecting like enrichment. Is that possible? Is that just like a pipe dream? Am I just like, Comrade Harris now? Like, I don't know, but I really want more stuff like that.
Absolutely. I've been thinking about Framing Agnes as a Canadian production and how it's sort of like outside of the advanced capitalism that we're negotiating in America, and just how my creative decisions are so dictated by the market and what's, been offered to me. It is brutal, and it is oftentimes very nebulous. And I question, like, how do these, why this story? How did this story get past all of these filters? And how can I, have integrity and offer integrity to the subjects who kind of end up in these contested arenas where they're going to be highly visible? We're navigating a kind of advanced capitalism that's really unprecedented and always changing.
Zachary, I don't know if you're comfortable or able to talk about, I don't know, that moments of hitting against the wall for you in the way that Jeremy has.
I'm like, what's, yeah.
It can even be just sort of like, because my feeling is that there are formal constrictions at stake too, right? Like Fake Friends is a really perfect example because it was a live theater show that was being produced during the pandemic that was seen online, and it was a different way of thinking about theater and how people can engage with that, and it felt very much of the internet for the internet. And so that felt like a formal leap that I would not expect that for money to be the end goal of an endeavor like that, but of what is essentially avant-garde art, you know.
Yeah. I mean, I'm interested in the collective good. I'm interested in, I'm not interested in individual ambition, which is the kind of tenet of republicanism, anybody on the right. And I think that has ruined our planet. That capitalism has ruined our planet, and that we're going to be in a more survival mindset for the rest of our lives and with future generations on Earth as well. I am dismayed oftentimes at just the amount of damage control I've done in my career for other people, helping out filmmakers, producers, mitigate the damage they've done in creating representations without the participation of trans or non-binary people. And that's a wall that I've kind of, learned to walk up. Like you shift your plane of gravity and you're like, okay, this is the ecosystem that I'm navigating. So sometimes in hindsight, in these 10 years that I've been doing this Hollywood game, I wish that I'd spent less time enabling and coddling cis people and educating them. But I hope that kind of paid that into the future, or paid it forward, and truly that young creators will benefit from some of that work. But occasionally I'll look through, like, somebody will reach out and I'll look in my email history and realize, like, oh my God, I spent so much time not being compensated, communicating with them about their problematic project, which was, of course, torn apart by the community. And yeah, and so I think there's like, there's a feeling of running in place when you're doing that kind of work. And I'm always, things are always crossing my desk that are surprising. But I've learned to say no to a lot of things, and my life has been all the better for it.
Saying no is a really hard thing to learn, and it's the thing. I have a really amazing assistant, Rafi, who is a genius, and I love her. And that's been the thing we've been talking about a lot recently, is and her and my writer's assistant and our writer's PA had this big conversation about, like, the beauty of no and the complication of no, because, like, no is still something I have trouble saying, but I do say it a lot more than some of my peers. And even so, every time I say no, I realize it was right. Does that make sense? Like, I think that I'm in a moment now where I'm realizing that most of my idols did not make studio work, and that felt like that. It feels like there was a reason for that, and I think that, like, there's something I should follow in that reasoning and that understanding when it comes to what kind of artist I want to be and what kind of, like, legacy I want to leave behind.
And I think I'd be remiss to not mention as well that like the allyship that has emerged in the past few years has been incredible, and that like that was what was missing before. Trans people were seen in such a pejorative way that even our like gay, lesbian, bisexual kin, were not in alignment with us, did not know us, and were not giving us any help. And the arrival of allies, I think, is what's marked the movement for trans equality. It's other people caring. And I think that it's in the face of such a ruthless oppression. And in the Trump era, kind of seeing that and realizing how omnipresent, how haunting, how deeply rooted it is, has given us an opportunity to get it together, to work across the, work across communities.
Is there a politic that sort of, and I don't mean politics in the capital P electoral stuff, but just like a sense of ethic maybe, that you feel like guides or informs your work? Or do you think that is just not a good way to think about art and art making?
My work is informed by vote. Just vote. No. I don't know. I think that like
us and Biden.
Exactly. I think that my politic is generally and genuinely been about pushing myself and my audience to think deeper about the communities I serve and the communities I'm a part of, and hoping that they think differently about the communities they're a part of. That's all I can do, right? And I don't know that I can attach that to any party or any system necessarily, because like those things change throughout history, right? But I do know that now those things have been about like looking at the ways we look at like the oppressed among us, and how we don't protect them, right? So I guess, again, like I was raised Christian, and so I think that maybe some like weird Judeo-Christian politic is inside of there, like the sort of Jesus, like think of the like the least of us,
Sure.
Maybe.
Do you feel like you have an expectation of what, or a hope of what you want people to come away with?
I think at first when I started doing TV, especially like 10 years ago, and I think at first there was a lot of like patting on my head being done by other people, being like, isn't it so great that you're on TV? And aren't you, just like a lot of like, don't you feel so special? And the truth is like, yes, I feel very special, very lucky. Like I can't believe I get paid to do this thing that I love, and I get, to interact with really interesting people all the time and work with people I admire and play characters that I've never seen before and all that stuff. But yeah, I think I went into it because of the way that it was treated at first as being kind of like just something that I was really lucky to be able to do. And so I saw it as like I don't know what I used to see it as, but now now more and more, I don't want to feel like I'm overcoming being Latin to be talented, or I'm overcoming being a woman to be talented, or I'm overcoming being gay to be interesting in other ways that aren't just about being gay. Like I do want those things, and so my I guess my politics around the thing are I guess more and more I'm not interested in. I understand that there's a lot of attrition because of where we're at right now with society. A lot of people think that we're moving way too quickly. A lot of people think that we're not moving quickly enough as far as like understanding who exists in the world and who gets to exist and who gets to be on television stuff. But I want to I don't want to have the conversations anymore about like struggle, you know, have the only stories being told about people of color or queers just being about struggle. I guess my politic is now trying to create characters or be part of projects to tell other stories that aren't just struggle, that fill in, you know, the details of our life in a way that are of our lives that are more honest and real and portray us the way we actually are, which is not just like constantly, you know, like, you know, under duress from our circumstance. Yeah, I mean, yeah.
For me, is that for me or
Oh, it's really for both of you, ultimately. Yeah. Or all of you, all three of you. Sorry. I forgot there's a ghost present.
You go first, Jeremy. I'll throw in a few things after.
I think that I do want people to come away with looking at their neighbor the way they might look at their cousin or their sibling or their friend, you know. I think that one of the things I love about theater specifically, and one of the reasons that was the first place I was at, is that, like, you know, as the artist, I can be there and watch how my community is interacting with each other in real time, right? How they like are uncomfortable together and then become uncomfortable with me at the same time. Like they become uncomfortable with each other first, then they become uncomfortable with me, then they become like angry with each other for like laughing at the wrong times or like looking, leering too long, and then they start being mad at me for making them do any of that to begin with. And there's something kind of great about like the fact that like all that can happen and then I can sit and talk with them in the lobby afterwards. And I think that if anything, I think that like I grew up around a lot of people who had I grew up in the South, and a lot of people had a lot of difficulty saying honestly all of the things that affected them in their day-to-day life, while being able to speak very openly about certain things that affected their family in the past. And I want people to be more open about talking about all of those things together and how those things inform each other. I think that's what I want.
I love that. I feel like I could listen to you talk forever. I feel like I have a politic of curiosity, of porousness, of exchange, and really asking enough questions to try to understand what something is. I feel like concerned for our ability to cross-pollinate and understand different viewpoints. I think that's the trap of a polarized populace, is, you know, dehumanizing and not understanding, you know, what's at stake. I just to echo Jeremy's kind of origins as a Jewish person, Tikkun Olam, which means healing the world, tzedakah, which means justice. Those values, I think, really inform my life trajectory, and that the personal is political. And we have to participate in the collective. We have to participate in our democracy as well. It's not on autopilot. It's up to us to change ourselves, our communities, and the world ultimately.
Zachary and Roberta, I think, you know, there's something about that being an artist demands a certain level of vulnerability. And then at the same time, you're in this industry that is inherently dehumanizing. I think capital sort of forces you to think of yourself as a commodity in that sense, or that you're producing commodity. And, you know, how do you sort of maintain that or protect yourself in that sense, right? Of the part of you that needs to be able to create openly and be porous, as you said, but also in an industry that will buffet you and require you to be hard, I think.
that I kind of think that that's a struggle that I have actually is the moment that we're in calls for acknowledgement that this is still kind of new. And so there's the huge part of me that wants to be very grateful and very like, just present in like how lucky it is to be part of something when it's in such a new place. But I also just really I just want to I want to move things along, and have conversations that lead to risk. I read a couple of years ago, I read something that kind of changed my life, which it was talking about like studying what makes people happy, and it was saying that like the things that we all think about that are the causes of happiness, like health or wealth or fame or success or love or friendship, any of those things, those are actually less likely to make you happy than to have taken risks. And so I think that I find myself in this position now where I want to take more risks with storytelling, with creating characters and stories and telling stories that are just riskier, that are going to be met, of course, with criticism that is new and more interesting and more nuanced. And yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, understanding what you symbolize, understanding the ways in which you will be reduced, and I think that allows you to overcome those ways of seeing yourself. And ultimately, public figures, any subjugated people resist being defined by an outside world. So we know that inherently, that there is a distinction between who we are truly in our private moments internally, and to really actually like separate that from we've just merged our like digital selves, these idealized ways of presenting ourselves, performing vulnerability in public even, which is so different than the previous era. Like there's an advantage to it as well, but it's also voyeuristic and narcissistic. And so I participate, I think, really minimally in social media in particular. I have a private life, I have a personal life, I have, things that are just, I did put that out there before, I think, in the case of
relationship.
Relationship with Reese, like we are both introverts, like we were not, under other circumstances may have not put that work out there, but realizing that there was a complete void of images of trans people together, we felt an ethical responsibility to put it out there. And I've enjoyed, moving behind the camera and being behind the scenes. That's kind of my preferred mode. And I think I have actually more value there in a lot of ways as a thinker and a creator and artist. And I don't feel defined by the outside world. The outside world, doesn't have the framework yet to see us in our complexity. So like we can see each other in our complexity and retain a sense of self that's not hinged on judgment or outside evaluation.
The outside world does not have the range. I love that.
It's very true. Speaking of like, to sort of like drill into something that has been going on in the discourse, so to speak, was the Parul Segal's piece about the trauma plot in the New Yorker, where she has, is very skeptical of the way in which it flattens, distorts people. But it did strike me as something that I was like, trauma is a real thing that also exists for marginalized people, and I was just curious to hear what your own thoughts on how that should exist in a work, really. Like, is it a flattening, distorting effect, like, maybe A Little Life, allegedly?
Well, yeah, I feel like, sorry.
Yeah, no, I just feel like we should just talk about things.
I actually, like, that piece really annoyed me because it was just like, if
Wait,
you just
which
want
one?
to say,
The
of
New Yorker one?
the New Yorker one, is like, if
Okay.
you just want to say you don't like Hanya, just say that. Like Andrea Long Chu did, like, just say that. Because, like, actually, like, most, like, again, like, as a nerd and like as someone who can point to like a lot of novels, I think that like her like locating trauma plots as like the new like marriage plot, or the new sort of like as like a specifically like 21st century like sort of like innovation is like actually wrong. Like, maybe in some of the ways it's deployed is like correct, but like even when she attempted to like say like, oh, Toni Morrison kind of had trauma in her books, but like it was different. It was like, no, but it literally wasn't. Like, literally, you were in the present and she's constantly flashing back to getting to the closer part of her trauma. And then at the third act of the book, the start of the third act of the book, we go to the moment of trauma where spoiler alert, she kills her baby. And then if that makes sense of everything else we've seen in the book so far. And then we like keep it moving. And then there's another moment of trauma wherein like we go to the middle passage. Like, the book is all trauma plot, and yet she's like, but that's different because it feels universal. And I'm like, for what? Because she has a Nobel? Like, again, I don't know. I think that like right now, part of the problem that I have with criticality is that criticality is utilized to its laziest degree. And as someone who loves criticism and how criticality has been wielded in the past by some of our great critics, I like yearn for a moment and a time when like artists and critics were in dialogue together, when critics seemed to have like more curiosity about the canons that they were like dissecting, instead of a curiosity around like getting clicks, right? And I think that like to create like a sort of clickbait headline in and around ostensibly just one novelist,
I mean,
it was like one novelist and like 2 TV shows.
I mean, she did talk about a broad range, but it
You know what I mean? You read the same thing I did. I feel like it was a bit it felt like really intellectually lazy. That's how I feel about trauma. And as someone who like likes the ways in which my own trauma plays out in and around my work, but I also think that like in a lot of ways my work defied the sort of like modalities of like the trauma plot as she put them. Sure. I still have to say that like I eat up a sort of like a trauma plot that like mode that like works like a melodrama, right? Because like I think one of the things she's also like contending with is the ways in which melodrama works, because in melodrama in the third act one unmasks the villain, right? The villain is unmasked, and for us the villain is trauma, right? That's how that works. So when you look at something like Big Little Lies, and that the way that trauma plot works, it's literally just like pure traumatic of theory or dramatic theory of a melodrama, and it's kind of beautiful. And that for me is bread and butter. It's bread and butter.
Yeah, I think that there are we have so much to learn from people's stories, people who have faced a lot of trauma in their lives, because often it's trauma that you can't even imagine if it's someone completely unlike yourself. And so I think that there's a lot of value in in learning about what traumatic experiences people have. But at the same time, I don't think that, like, I just, I think I can only come from the perspective of being queer and not white. And so many of the stories that are being told or have been told or currently being told about non-white queer communities is so often about the struggle that we face, about like how, you know, it's hard to leave the house, about how like it's hard to be yourself. It's hard to just, you know, and like I was saying just a little bit ago, like I just think that I do think that there's like an unexplored joy to people. That is the same kind of, that would serve kind of the same function as maybe understanding people's trauma. People who have such different experiences from our own and understanding their trauma and humanizing them in that way. I think that we have a lot to learn about what joy people experience in the face of like what we can imagine is huge amounts of trauma. And yeah, I look forward to stories that speak of joy and of course not to ignore trauma. I don't think that that's responsible, but there is, I just, you know, we see so many, you know, like I truly find myself actually wondering, like, I truly wonder what, you know, if I see on the news, you know, a Syrian refugee being interviewed about their experience right now in a camp, you know, like I actually think to myself, like, I wonder what that person does at night, what they're thinking of. And when they smile, what are the things that make them smile? What memories come up, or what kinds of plans they have for the future, or if they even have the space for that, what those things are. And so you know, like, yeah, I do think that there is a place for trauma, and I think there's just the biggest space for exploring joy and finding ways to have joy, kind of not define people, but help to create nuance for people, different kinds of people.
I've often wondered about trans folks in terms of, well, I'll tell an anecdote. One of my best girlfriends who visited the set of Transparent, like stayed with me for weeks, you know, during like the filming years ago, obviously. And somehow it came up in conversation recently that she had never seen it, that she never watched the show, and that she in fact never watches anything with trans people represented in it. And she's one of my sisters. We came up in New York together as teenagers, and I was flabbergasted that like she had just never shared that with me. That I had assumed this whole time that she had, you know, had seen things that I'd made, etc. And she confided in me, and it was only because of our close relationship that she avoids anything with like representations of trans life, because she finds it traumatizing. I am much more open, I think, to seeing and to absorbing difficult things that make me uncomfortable. And I've personally never felt traumatized watching much of anything, and I would rather know. I'm one of the people who I would rather know than not know what's out there. And I also feel like you can be in the room with a tiger without the tiger biting you. And that's probably part of being a little more battle scarred in terms of coming out as trans in the early 2000s and realizing just the basic humiliations that happened in the first decade of my transness that no longer do. So, and yeah, I'm fascinated by the generational difference, and they happen so quickly in our community. It's like the difference of 3 years, 5 years is like a lifetime. And I think that there's schisms sometimes, like younger generations don't know what it was like to walk through high school where there was no gay straight alliance and you were like visibly queer and getting beaten up every day. Like that's just, I mean, granted that still happens in places, but not the way it did in the 90s. So yeah, I think I have a higher tolerance personally, but I understand where it comes from. And I never expect that my trans and non-binary friends are going to watch things that I make, and I don't take it personally either when they don't.
You know, Zachary, I want to, on that note of like generational divides and even just like personality divides, like I think something I think about a lot is that for me, a safe space and a safe home for like all the things I felt were like fucked up European films, right? Like, so when I was growing up, I was like, oh my God, like Dogville, like, oh my God, like, you know, like,
Not
the
this.
dreams. Like, it's just like, that was how I saw myself. I like saw myself living in like a Claire Denis film. And like, that was what subjugation as like a Black gay person in the South felt like. Like I was like a white woman in Africa, you know? And like, I was like, I don't know, I felt so much of myself in that. Or even like watching like, you know, like all of these like really weird like anime or like you know, discovering Old Boy when I was like 14, like all these things that like had like raw fucked up like passionate drama at the core were how I saw like my lived experience. And so when I started making things, I wanted to make things like that. And I discovered that there were a lot of people that are in my demographic who are Black, who are queer, who like don't want to see queer people go through that and don't want to see Black people go through those things, and are so much more comfortable seeing it on the other, right? Like an other that's not them. And I think I had always imagined those things on me because that's how I imagined myself. And so that's one thing that's been very difficult for me, is realizing that the trauma, things that other people see as trauma, I see as like sort of a freedom, this sort of like freeness and like who's telling the story and how they're telling it, you know, or in freeness in their psyche and their imaginary. And then something I've been talking about a lot about with Sam Levinson, who created Euphoria, on which I'm a co-producer, is that like you know, it's been very curious to recognize that like the interpersonal on Euphoria, the children love. They eat it up. They love all of it. But the things that I would have loved, or that like I think most of us would have loved being able to see on TV, which is just like sex and sexuality, are so disgusting to kids. Like literally, like the amount of DMs I get, like, why is there another sex scene in this episode? I'm like, wait, you aren't like excited about there being sex scenes? Like, what happened? And then I found out from executives at HBO Max and at Netflix that when kids see sex scenes, that when Gen Z sees sex scenes in movies, they like fast forward through them. And I thought about it and I was like, oh yeah, like their entire sexuality was shaped by the fact that Me Too happened when they were 12. You know, like if I had started coming of age and realized that every actor and actress that I was obsessed with had been like abused in Hollywood, I might have a weird experience watching people like create sex and sexuality in front of me as well, which I think also adds to the sort of like relationship to trauma and what it means for an audience, and who takes what in how. So yeah, I don't know. Those are things I've been thinking about recently, my current preoccupations, and I just wanted to like add to that conversation, Zach.
That's fascinating.
I also want, is there like a tyranny of small differences thing happening too, where it's like, oh, like, you know, I might be more critical of seeing a gay Asian guy on screen or that narrative because I have certain expectations of what that should look like, that I will then be more critical of if it fails to meet those expectations. And I don't know if your friend felt the same way about maybe seeing trans narratives also, but yeah. Anyway, I think we're sort of towards the end of our time, but I to end on a note of thinking forward and sort of futurity, I'm curious about like what sort of forms you're eager to break or sort of mess around with in the future.
That's such a good question. I wish I had like answer prepared. I mean, we're moving into a landscape that will be increasingly virtual reality, 3D. I think, you know, technology will really probably dictate to some extent the genre busting that's possible. And yeah, I don't know. I'm also just interested in what can happen locally, what can happen in person, what can happen, you know, how we can change each other still in physical space. But certainly, yeah, you go first.
No, Zachary, keep going. Sorry.
I think it's certainly like a future landscape that is unprecedented. I feel like the opportunities I'm getting and the projects that I'm making are unprecedented in the sense that there isn't anything else out there. And so little, you know, real cultural work has been done. So yeah, I'm looking forward to continuing to bust through barriers and see through walls.
Yeah, I think that I'm really into what you're saying about virtual reality, and because I think that like the thing I've been feeling, like sort of my trend forecasting for 2020s is that, like, you know, I think that like manifestos are back. Like, you know, I think we're long overdue for a new dogma type moment in cinema or TV even. I also think that like it's the 20s again, and so like again in the 1920s, like manifestos were super in, but also so was surrealism, and I think that surrealism and collectives and like some version of that is going to come back. And I think that I'm really excited about being a part of that. I know that's where my stories are headed. And I feel like now that you're talking about virtual reality, I'm like, oh, there's so much potentiality for like playing with the surreal inside of spaces like virtual reality, and like what can that mean? I mean, it's insane to me that like my 11-year-old niece and I, like my 11-year-old niece came out to me over our Oculus, because I got her an Oculus for Christmas last year, and we were playing a game where she's in Virginia, I'm in New York, and we're flipping hamburgers together, and she tells me she's queer while that's happening. I'm like, what universe is this? It's so crazy, you know?
Were you playing Overcooked?
Yes, we're playing Overcooked. I'm really bad at the game.
Is this your the niece who was on the red carpet with you recently?
Yes.
Your mom?
Yes.
I love that.
It's so fun.
You're my
Coming out
favorite
during
person to
Overcooked.
follow,
Coming out during Overcooked. Sorry, Zachary. What did you say?
Oh, Jeremy's one of my favorite people to follow on Instagram.
I have made my career professionally, made more of a career out of acting, and I'm slowly going into the place where I am so riled up by the stuff that I'm observing that I'm finally putting intentionality behind my writing. And so there's a lot of you know, like the documenting my life has been really interesting, because it's just forced this kind of perspective that I wasn't aware that I had until I started actually practicing it. And so I don't know, I want to be more in charge of my creative self. I think that's a new form, I guess you could say, as opposed to just like kind of being handed a character and creating that. You know, I want to create my own world, so to speak.
Well, I feel like I could talk to all three of you forever, but we're going to have to call it at this point. But thank you so much for having this conversation with me today.
Thank you. And can I just say, we all look really good. Like all of us look amazing. Like I was shocked by my own, and then I started looking at everyone else. So I was like, this is great lighting, whatever's happening. We all showed up well.
That's the most important thing.
It counts for something, for sure. It's such a gift to spend time with you all today. Sincerely. I hope that we can all do it again soon.
IRL.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
All right, logging
Bye.
off. Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much for having me, guys. This was a huge honor, and I feel very, very happy and humbled by this experience. And thank you for everything. Bye, guys.